It's called Mafeking Street, and the reason it's called Mafeking Street is because it was named after an event in Bow War, like a lot of other streets in Featherstone. There were a Kimberley Street and an Earl Street, and this is Mafeking Street, obviously named after C.J. Mafeking. And I was born at number 4. Well, I wasn't actually. I was born in Emsworth Maternity Hospital, but I was brought to number 4 after a couple of days. And my next door neighbour here were a family called Sauls, but they moved out when I was young. And Miss and Mrs. Larkins came here. And Bill Larkins was a great character, and he used to bring his wireless out into the street and set it up on a little stool, and we listened to 1966 World Cup on his wireless. And I'll never forget him saying, North Korea were playing Italy, and he says to me, "Pat the Wicks just scored, Ian." And it was a fantastic thing for an old man in Mafeking Street to say. And at number 9 lived John Tom Hope. He worked at Snidel Pit, and he used to do his own washing because he was a bit of a bachelor man. My granny always said he had the finest white sheets she'd ever seen, and he was right proud when he used to peg them out online. And he lived there with his sister Anna, and Anna was what they'd say these days a person with learning difficulties. And their auntie and uncle lived next door to them, and that were Emily and Johnny Hope. And Johnny had a fat little dog called Rex, and it used to do tricks, and we'd all gather round as kids to watch it doing its tricks, and he'd say, "I don't love thee anymore." And when he said it, his dog would come up and give him a cuddle. It was really funny. And Emily wasn't so well, and she used to lay on a leather chaise longue all day covered in crocheted blankets. And Johnny had this fantastic old, his master's voice gramophone player with a big tin horn on it. And I used to go in his house to talk to him. I used to love watching him smoking his woodbines and sitting in front of the fire and reminiscing about old times. And then next door to them lived a family called Jarvis. There's Big Baz and the son Neil. And then there was a bloke called Les Knight lived next door to them. And they had 2 daughters. Les worked on night shift at Wakefield Prison. He was a prison officer. And then it's bottom house, that white painted house now, the mate of mine called Paul Hickman lived there, and his sister Diane, and their mum and dad, Mrs. Hickman and Fred, what is his father. And they were 8 characters. We were once jumping, round back of here there were middens, binholes and outside lavatories, and there were gaps between them all as you went down row. We used to play at jumping over these gaps in binholes. And my brother did it one day, and he jumped, and Fred Hickman had a wooden shed at bottom, and our kid jumped over 5 or 6 gaps in middens, and then carried on and jumped straight onto the top of Fred Hickman's shed and went straight through planks of wood on top. And there was an old mattress in the shed, and he landed on it, and one of the springs from old mattress came up and stuck in his leg, and we couldn't get it out. We had to cart him off to hospital to have this rusty spring surgically removed from his leg. That was Fred Hickman. I slept and had this recurring dream, and it involved this snicket outside here. I always pictured myself in this dream coming out snicket. First of all, to tell my mother I'd passed me 11 plus, and then the dream would continue, and I'd come home and tell her I'd got to college, and then further than that, I'd tell her that I'd got to some posh university somewhere, and I'd imagine myself coming down this snicket with a university scarf tied around my neck, blowing in bloody wind. And none of it happened. I didn't even pass my 11 plus. I went from George Street School to a secondary modern because I didn't even pass my exam to go to grammar school. When my mum and dad divorced in about 1973, I came to live back at my gran's, and that was my bedroom. The windows open there. And it was my little world, if you like. It's a tiny bedroom because it was half the size of a normal bedroom because the other half had been made into a bathroom. And it was when I started collecting records in earnest, really. I collected the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Kinks, Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane. When I was about 16, I became enamoured, I suppose is the word, with the Beatles' White Album. And there's a very avant-garde track on there called Revolution Number 9. It's where John Lennon intones number 9, number 9, number 9. And then there's this very weird loops and bleeps and static. And I'd come home from work as an apprentice, And I put this record on and lay on my bed listening to it. My granny had been wondering what the hell I was doing, because I'd created this little world for myself in my bedroom. And I kept all my records under bed because I had no shelves to put them on, so I piled all my LPs up and kept them under bed. So you got this great scenario where I look out onto a backyard full of gossipy neighbours and old people telling stories about a time long past, and under my bed is this other world that I've created for myself through listening to LPs by Bob Dylan and Jefferson Airplane. It seems strange now that you'd actually play football against two gable ends of walls at top of a street, but that's what we used to do. And there'd be about a dozen or more of us, like in football. There were a goalpost painted on this gable end here, and a goalpost painted on that other gable end, and in the middle of the goalpost it said Stoke City. Now, why some people from Featherstone would support Stoke City is anybody's guess. I think it might have been to do with the fact that Gordon Banks played in goal for Stoke City, and he was an hero, wasn't he? So all the kids in these streets decided they were going to support Stoke City. So we had these goalposts here and Stoke City written on them, and as I say, there'd be a dozen of us playing football straight across this street. And I suppose you could do it because there weren't as many cars about in 60s as there is now. Because if you look at sign, you can see that it's called Hardwick Road now. But in my mind, it'll always be Mafeking Street. I suppose if I were to trace my family roots to this street, Mafeking Street, I'd have to say, well, when my granny and granddad moved here, when they got married in 1938, they were married and they moved into number 3 Mafeking Street. They didn't own it, they rented it. An owner was a stay-away landlord. He was a solicitor's agent and he lived at Leeds. And they never owned it. They rented it from 1938 to 1979 when they moved into an old folks flat. And when they moved here, Mafeking Street was, I suppose, 40 years old or something at that time, just a normal terrace street with outside lavatories and dustbin holes in backs. And there was a wall across then. We see that school sign at the bottom of here. There was a wall, and beyond that were just fields and cows in fields. And they used to bring cows up this street because there was a farm just down the road from here. And when they wanted to bring them in for milking, they brought them up here and down that road to take them to milking parlours.
Oh, I thought you'd have gone with pigeons, Arthur. You'd have took you back, you could have backed it back, couldn't you?
No, I'd have flown back if I got out through me. All right, Ian.
That's to France. And it was, cost me 20 odd pound. 27 odd. I've just had our flowers fetched down this morning to put round border.
Is there many people left up on these allotments who have pigeons now?
No.
How many is there?
And then there's Trevor Atkinson down at bottom. And that's all there is now.
And they're still racing them?
Yeah. Well, down at bottom, there used to be old Mr. Johnson. There was Tommy Turpin. There were John Holt, people of them there.
Yeah.
And Derek Carther. Gordon Carther, the biggest liar that can. He ought to be a politician.
I remember him on a pigeon. There was a bloke called, I used to call him Mr. Cuddy, I don't know if that was his right name, but he gave me my first pigeon when I was a lad. I mean, I wasn't racing pigeons, but I had some of his pets. And he said, here, and he gave me this red checkered hen, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And he just got it in his hand and put it into mine, and I just stroked it. And I ended up with about half a dozen. And I always used to worry that they'd never come back when I first let them out. And can you remember when gas tanks were down there? My pigeons used to fly out at loft and go and rest on top of gas tanks. I used to be there with me tin of corn, shaking me tin of corn, saying, come on, please come back, please come back.
That's some, that's many years gone back.
It is.
It is.
When gas tanks were there.
Aye,
I know.
aye, that's some, gone back some years there.
I tell you where we used to get our pigeon corn from. They used to call it Indian corn or something, didn't they?
Aye,
And there was a shop called Race Tricks.
top end.
Aye, I used to go there for it. He had all meal bins and corn bins, and he'd scoop it out with. He used to wear an old brown smock, and he'd scoop it out into a brown bag for you.
My mate's idea, Barry Hawkins, he said we can make more money at funerals and weddings.
Well, pigeons.
Well, that's what they do. It's big money. And I'll choose where they are.
Yeah.
They'll just go back. And it's
I hadn't thought of that.
60, 70 pound a time. What they do. I said to him, we'll have to get some blackings for wet funerals. I said, we'll be all right here.
Can I remember old Johnny Hope having an allotment up
Down
there?
there.
He would have had it too,
That's
wouldn't he?
many years since.
And his nephew, John Tom,
Aye.
he worked at Snidle Pit.
And who was it? His daughter, John Tom's daughter.
Anna. Well, she was no, she wanted his daughter, she was his niece.
Her niece.
Aye.
No, she was, when we went in pro, she always come up to me and said, "Gives a sick."
Aye.
And I don't smoke.
Aye.
She knows you one of mine.
Yeah.
I also give her one. I shouldn't.
She used to stand outside at Corrie, asking for woodbines. But and on the way in, nobody was merry, so nobody gave her one. But when they were coming out, they were all merry and they were all giving her.
But,
It's that thing about what you think about homing pigeons and how do they find their way back home. It's one of life's great unexplained mysteries. And is it that they've got a kind of magnet or compass in the brain that allows them to do it? Or is it something in the atmosphere or a certain type of weather that allows them to do it? I mean, it might be memory. When I come here, my map is my memory. It's not a geographical map, it's not a road map that brings me here. Although I know the streets very well, it's childhood memory that's my compass to here. And I think the childhood memories in your formative years, say between your toddler years and your 10 and 11-year-old, are so profound that they draw you like a magnet. So I think rather than the magnet being in your mind or somewhere in the atmosphere, I think it's in tangible things like walls and streets that you once walked on and games that you played. And I think you're drawn back to it by memory. So it might be that homing pigeons are drawn back to where they're from by memory. It's where their egg was, where they hatched from, and where they were reared. And it might be that there's something in that nurture, how your parents and grandparents and friends and neighbours nurtured you, and nurtured you well enough to bring you back home. So it might be that they come home because that's where they were born from. And I think it might be that I like to come to this street because I was born here and raised here. So my homing device then is pure memory and things I did as a child.